Do you want explosive growth for your business or podcast? Learn the counterintuitive weed strategies our guest Stu Heinecke has used to rapidly spread his influence. Drawing on the relentless success of pesky plants, Stu reveals key mindsets and unfair advantages weeds leverage to get where they want to go. Immerse yourself in the tenacious secrets of the plant kingdom to infuse a vibrant expansion across your podcast and your organization. Hello, incurable creators. I'm excited to bring you some bonus episodes featuring exclusive interviews from the 2023 PodUp Virtual Podcasting Summit. Each Thursday for months, you're going to hear interviews from a diverse range of podcasting and marketing experts. My hope is these repurposed interviews will inspire you with new ideas and insights to take your podcast to the next level. And of course, remember to listen every Tuesday for our regular episodes of Podcasting Secrets as well. Now, let's dive into today's bonus interview from PodUp's 2013 Podcasting Summit. Hello, I'm Nathan Gwilliam, the CEO of PodUp and your host for the Podcasting Summit. In this interview, I am joined by Stu Heinecke. Stu is a growth strategist and a cartoonist. He's also the author of 2 different books, How to Grow Your Business Like a Weed and How to Get a Meeting with Anyone. We're going to focus on how to grow your podcast like a weed. Thank you so much for joining us, Stu.
Thanks for having me on. I think we're going to have a blast doing this. It's the first time I've ever applied weed strategy to growing a podcast.
And you've been on a lot of podcasts. How many podcasts do you think you've been interviewed on?
I think it's close to 300. Those include episodes I've hosted because I've had 2 podcasts myself. I've been a guest, I think, probably on hundreds of podcasts.
Can you share with us your origin story? How did you come up with this grow like a weed concept? And then maybe include in your podcast story as well.
We all know what it means to grow like a weed, obviously. And many years ago, I was driving down the Santa Monica Freeway one day, and I noticed this dandelion just sort of caught my attention, growing out of a crack in the concrete median. And I thought, wow, isn't that incredible? Because, it just looked happy with those happy yellow flowers, and the seed pod was just blowing seeds around in the smoggy turbulence in the middle of the freeway. I was thinking, how did it do that? How did it pull that off? Because, well, of course, we all know that they have seeds that fly everywhere, and they probe every possible opportunity to take root. But what is it about weeds that allows them to do that? Because, we don't see, oak trees or petunias, or, we don't see most plants growing out of cracks in the concrete medians in the middle of freeways. And so what is it about weeds that makes them so special? How do they pull these things off? And so that launched a sort of a lifelong odyssey for me to understand, what is it the weeds are doing? What's their model? Do they have a model? Do they have a unified model? And if they do, is it something we can apply to our businesses? And it turns out they do have one, and we can apply it to our businesses quite easily. In fact, I think it's actually the theory of everything about growing anything.
All right, so share that with us. What is your weeds model?
Well, it's actually pretty simple, and they all do it. They do it in very different ways, very different expressions of it, but they all leverage a fierce mindset. Odd that you would think of a plant as having a mindset, but watch what they do. They have a quite apparent mindset. So how they arrive at it, I don't know, but they have a fierce mindset, and they leverage that with unfair advantages, and they do it according to, I should say, against collective scale, and they do it according to a process that is, it's millions of years old, but it lives, it changes, it adapts to almost any challenge almost immediately.
Give us some examples of how weeds do that.
If you go out in your yard or your garden and you mow the lawn and you mow down let's say all the dandelions, what's the first thing that grows back? The dandelions are like, boom, they're right back on their process, and they're building right back again. What's really cool about that? I guess you could say that, well, they don't get depressed about it. They don't get anything. They don't feel anything, I suppose, in terms of emotions. So emotions aren't getting in the way. It's not allowing them to get depressed or to feel like, well, no, I deserve something better than this, or anything like that. They don't feel sorry for themselves. All the things that hamper us, that hamper our ability to grow and move forward, they don't experience that at all. They just immediately go back to being very aggressive about running their process. So that's one. Unfair advantages, really interesting. Weeds have all kinds of unfair advantages. And we go back to that familiar dandelion again. Well, they've got seeds that fly around and they probe every possible opportunity to take root. Compare that to, let's say, pine trees or oaks that drop acorns at their roots. Essentially, if, let's say, physically gaining ground in the world is analogous to gaining ground in our markets, well, then, following what an oak tree does or a sequoia tree, it doesn't make a lot of sense if we want to gain ground in our marketplaces. So they've got all kinds of versions of unfair advantages that allow them to function in ways that other plants just can't. So seeds is one of them, but thorns is another. It's spikes, hypodermic spikes filled with poison and toxins, and to deny anything from coming into their turf. They defend their turf with those things. They often will they'll produce root systems that go down much further than the other plants around them, so they survive while other plants don't. I don't know where you are actually, Nathan, but I'm in the Pacific Northwest, and so fall is coming, and the grass is dying off. Not the weeds; they're still growing. They're still green. So that's what it is. I mean, and then we could go on, but I don't want to keep. I'll be talking about weeds ad infinitum, and we don't want to just do that.
So can you take us through your weeds model and teach us how we can grow our podcast like a weed?
Well, again, I'm just going to take you through the nature of weeds. This is very similar to the model. Weeds always deal with what is. They never do anything without an unfair advantage. They never do anything alone. They're natural collaborators. They always focus on what makes them win, process, really. And then finally, they thrive in disrupted ground. They thrive best in disrupted ground. Think about it. We were just talking about your garden and your yard, and that's disrupted ground, actually. We have disrupted the ground, and that's where how yards are made. And weeds move in very, very quickly, very aggressively. They thrive best in those conditions. So for a podcast, let's think about this a little bit. I mean, we could talk about mindset, I suppose, but I mean, I guess really we've got to believe in what it is that we're doing, what we're talking about in our podcast, the focus of the podcast, that it deserves to win out there. It deserves to be the top podcast in its field. I mean, those kinds of aggressive, resilient, relentless kinds of attributes are what powers us in any business, and certainly in any business venture or project, like let's say a podcast. But then it gets really interesting when we start talking about, let's say, unfair advantages. I'm going to just say a little bit about my own, because maybe that helps to illustrate it. I'm one of the Wall Street Journal cartoonists. So when I call someone, I wrote the book, How to Get a Meeting with Anyone. If I call someone and I've sent them one of my cartoons, because I want to introduce myself, get in contact, create a meeting. And I call up, let's say, and I talk to to their assistant, and I say, "Hi, this is Stu Heinecke calling, and I'm calling because I'm sending a print of one of my cartoons. I'm one of the Wall Street Journal cartoonists, and so I'm sending a print of one of my cartoons. It's about your boss. What do you think the assistant is going to say?" I mean, they're always going, "What, really? Oh, that's cool." So, well, that's an unfair advantage. Who else can? Not very many people, let's say, can claim that. And by unfair advantage, what I mean is I want our competitors saying, well, that's not really fair. It's not like we're not talking about things that are illegal. We're just talking about things that are so unbeatable that your competitors just kind of fall away. And so that's one. I've got a bunch of them, but having books out is an incredible unfair advantage. I'm going to hold one up. Here's How to Grow Your Business Like a Weed. Reading backward, obviously, or oddly, but having a book out there in the world is an incredible unfair advantage, because you become then the recognized expert. I mean, literally, you're the person who wrote the book. That's incredible.
That's right. They assume that, yeah.
When I first started my career, the first part of my career was that I started an agency, and I was creating direct mail campaigns for publishers, for magazine publishers. And they were some of the most biggest and most sophisticated direct marketers in the world. So, just even penetrating that was going to be difficult. And but I said, I have this concept for direct mail of, using cartoons with personalization. So the cartoons will be on the outer envelope, and they will use data merge, just data points to do a mail merge so that each cartoon will be about each recipient. And I know they're going to love this because people love cartoons anyway. They're the best read and remembered parts of magazines and newspapers. I know they're going to love getting a cartoon about themselves if we're on target. And I know what I'm doing about getting these on target. And we need to put this to the test for your titles. And I ended up with all of the magazine publishers as clients because of that. And then because no one else, David Ogilvy used to say, David Ogilvy, the founder of Ogilvy and Mather, one of the top 10 ad agencies in the world. He was the original thought leader in marketing. And he used to say that humor doesn't work. I mean, humor doesn't work in advertising. People don't buy from clowns. He has a lot of ways of expressing don't use humor, it doesn't work. But all that did for me was it just cleared everybody else out, because I knew that cartoons were the best read and remembered parts of magazines and newspapers. That was the finding of editorial readership surveys. I knew this was going to work. And what it meant was that I'm out there applying something that no one else even dared to do. And as we got more and more of these test campaigns under our belt, I ended up with millions of dollars worth of test history that no one else in the world has. So I'm just saying, though, that all of those things amount to unfair advantages, so that as I move through the business world, I have these things that I pull out and say, I can help your team break through to their top accounts, or I can help you get more response to your campaigns, and that gives you a new unfair advantage. So unfair advantages they need to be a front-facing, front-burner kind of issue for anyone in business, and certainly anyone in that's a podcast producer. And we just think about what kinds of unfair advantages those could be. I guess we could look around at some of the podcasters that are out there. That might be a useful way to do it.
Is your Thorn strategy one of those unfair advantages? I know in your book you talk about that.
Yeah, with Thorn strategy, I'm talking about just like, let's say, you probably have blackberries just like we do, and I'm on an island just near Seattle. I'm sure they're there too. And so, when those things show up, you don't go there. You can't get in there until you knock them down anyway. So they deny access to their turf. And I think that really that's analogous to trademarks and patents and so forth, just legal protections, copyrights is another one, but legal protections of our IP. But yeah, I got to think about that, man. I guess if you're an expert, if you are the expert in a given field, that is kind of a Thorn strategy in a way, because how are people going to surmount that? I mean, how are competitors going to come in and say, yeah, but here's a Me Too podcast?
Or if you're the podcast in a niche that has the most reviews, right? You're going to show up highest and more people are going to choose to listen to yours because of your review Thorn strategy.
I think one of the things that makes me think of is Jocko. So Jocko is a former SEAL. Not everyone can go through life saying I was a former SEAL as well. So Jocko's podcast it's all about, it's themed about what are the things you have to do or become or be to be a SEAL, and it's really tough to break into that. And he did it. He pulled it off. So he's an authority on a lot of the things, toughness and discipline and organization and all the things that cause them to win out in the field, literally out in the field. So Jocko's got a great unfair advantage. I think, let's say Joe Rogan, obviously, is he the biggest? I think he has the biggest audience. That's always what I hear about his 11 million followers.
I don't think he has the biggest, but he might be one of the most well-known of everybody.
Well, I mean, so we know him from television first. I mean, the thing is, he's done other things. He's not just, look, I don't mean to use the word podcast. He's not only a podcaster, but we know him from television. Some of us know him from WWE, or not WWE, but the Octagon. What is that? I know I've gotten that wrong, but from the Octagon. And so he has these external sources of people knowing him that draw people to his podcast. And if he wasn't known that way, I don't think he would have had the following that he has. So those are unfair advantages. But so that's a large audience. But I think one of the great unfair advantages for a podcaster is probably who is your audience, really knowing your audience, but having a really interesting, very specific audience. Like my audience is only I don't know, we get 200 downloads a week or a month, let's say. So maybe that's not a very large podcast, but they're all startup entrepreneurs. And not only that, but they're involved in startups that within the last 6 months. So they're just starting new ventures. Well, that's a really specific audience. And we know that there will be speakers and guests that would love to reach that audience. So you don't have to have 11 million followers. You can have 200 or 1,000 that are very, very specific and highly desirable. That would make a great unfair advantage as well.
So in my yard, one of the worst weeds we deal with is morning glory. And it is a vine that grows on top of everything else, right? It grows through my rose bushes and all sorts of other plants and trees all over the yard. And one of the chapters of your book I know is called Vine. It's about the vine strategy, right? Can you tell us about that and how that applies to businesses?
Well, vine strategy, just to amplify what you said, look at what vines are. They're just tubes, essentially. The above, they have roots, but otherwise they're tubes and leaves and flowers, and but they're very, very successful because what they do is they borrow the infrastructure of whatever is nearby, whether it's other trees, you mentioned rose bushes, anything, and they end up on top of those objects, whatever they are. So if it's trees, they end up in the crown of the tree. Whatever is nearby, they end up gaining dominant access to the resources that everything in the plant world especially needs to grow. So sunlight. They're also on the ground, that they have roots, they're picking up water, but they're getting dominant access to sunshine.
They're blocking the light of the plants that they're growing on top of.
They are. Yeah, that's true. They definitely are. Eventually they'll kill the host, but what they're doing is they're competing. All of these plants are competing. And what are they competing for? Certainly one of them is just turf, which really amounts to water and sunshine. So they've come up with a very, very effective strategy for gaining dominant access to sunshine. Pretty cool thing, actually, if you think about it, unless you're the thing that they're growing on. That's not so great. But okay, how do we do that in our business? Well, that's actually one of the greatest features of my teaching weed strategy to business owners, is that we really, if weeds could talk to us, they would tell us, you need to team up with the smartest people you know as fast as you can. And the reason for that is that we're sort of brought up and trained to act in let's say, one-to-one leverage. So by that, I mean, we're told to, let's say, study hard, and we get good grades, and we get into a good school, and then we get into a good college, and then you get out and you get a great job. But you can't scale that. You can't have 1,000 jobs. That's one-to-one leverage. It's you put your time in and you get paid for it. And because you put your time in and that's what you're paid for, you don't have time for anything else. So you can't scale jobs. You can't have 1,000 jobs. And so to move beyond that, we need to collaborate like weeds do. We need to collaborate and create eventually collective scale. But even just to collaborate with a handful of people will change the scale, certainly of your business, and I would expect that it would change the scale of your podcast as well. So, some of the collaborations that I'm involved with, I think that these examples might help. One is, I'm an author, and you discover, if you've written books, to your delight, that authors love to team up, and they help each other constantly. So I'm teaming up with other authors. We're putting together growth strategy summits in bucket list locations around the world. But the thing is, I'm doing things with them that I couldn't do on my own, because otherwise I'm just speaking to my audience. But now I'm speaking to their audience as well. So I'm getting access, I should say, to their audiences as well. That causes growth. And because we're collaborating together, well, we're combining weed strategy with whatever their specialty is. It could be that if they're a sales author, sales that's fuel for growth. You can't grow a business without sales. So our specialties tend to combine in really interesting ways. So that's great. I mean, that is stuff that's happening that wouldn't happen without collaboration. And then another one that I think is really cool, and this is to grow my book. I'm applying weed strategy to growing anything, so certainly my book. And I have a collaboration with the NASDAQ Entrepreneurial Center. So in the book I noted, or rather I promised that I was going to start a new award called the Total Weed Award, and that was to recognize weed-like growth among entrepreneurs and startups. And so I reached out to my contact at NASDAQ and said, I promised to launch this award, and I think this would be great. What I'd love to do is collaborate with the NASDAQ Entrepreneurial Center. Could the center become the home of the award? And they said, yeah, we'd love that. So that gives the award, that changes the whole tenor of the award. It's not just an author making his private award. Now NASDAQ is involved. And that changes the scale of a lot of things. It's very, very exciting stuff. But any true collaboration means that you also are bringing unusual new benefits to them, right? Maybe new, unusual, unfair advantages to them. And so bringing that award to them gives them a new vehicle to sell sponsorship. So, and really it's to create fundraising opportunities for the Entrepreneurial Center. So and it's a great way to draw buzz. I mean, a Total Weed Award's kind of a funny thing. And so I think it causes people to become curious. What's that about? Where did that even come from? What are you talking about, Weed Award? But also then from there, who's winning and why? How'd that come about? And so it gives them a great new vehicle for audience participation and sponsorship and more. So those are two of mine, but why don't we think about how that might work for a podcaster? Well, I think one thing that's really interesting, I noticed, I watch a lot of YouTube videos, so I follow some channels. It's really analogous. I would say maybe it is part of podcasting, or else it's analogous at least. And I see podcasters getting onto each other's shows. Just interviewing other podcasters is a great way to pull two audiences together. Just trying to think what else. The other one is, I just explained that I've teamed up with NASDAQ. Well, what I did was I teamed up with a really venerable institution in the business world, which I guess also lends a lot of credibility to me and to the book, and obviously to the award itself. And it does a good thing for me also. And so I would think that if I would be looking for organizations to team up with also. Could you become the official podcast of an association, a big association? If you were doing a real estate podcast, could you become the official podcast or one of the official podcasts of BOMA? Now that I've said BOMA, I know what it is, but business office, I don't know. It's an association of commercial real estate people. So if you associated with an organization like that, well, then your podcast gains new credibility. Could you do it with a magazine, perhaps? I don't know. There are a lot of ways that you could create collaborations that change the tenor of your podcast and change the cloud of your podcast.
Yeah, I can think of a lot of examples of this Vine strategy and how podcasters could use it. It makes a lot of sense where you're building upon an existing structure or foundation. Your example of getting on other shows is great. Influencer marketing is another one where you're partnering with influencers, or even speaking at trade shows is a great example, right? You're leveraging that foundation, the structure that's already there to speak. Maybe working with mentors, right? And drawing on the expertise of someone that's already there, or participating in a mastermind group where there's others that already have that expertise in the space and you're leveraging that. So lots of different ways. That Vine strategy is very applicable. All right, one last strategy I want to ask you about from your book. Where I live, where it's very cold in the winter, last winter we had 2 nights that hit below -30. And so in a place like this, and where you have trees, the temperature is a really big deal. And we do a lot to protect the roots of our trees, because it really doesn't matter how cold the branches are, it matters how cold the roots get. And so people straw or mulch their roots of their trees to try to keep those a little bit warmer. We put inches of soil on top of it to try to keep it a little bit warmer. So can you tell us a little bit more about root strategy and how that might apply to podcasting?
Well, yeah, I mean, we have assets. I mentioned unfair advantages; those are assets, but we have all kinds of assets, be they physical or I mean, an IP and so forth. Um, and so in the book, I'm saying, and this is to business owners. I don't know if this. Well, we'll explore it whether it touches podcasting or not. But in business, we all have IP, or we should have IP. We should have accumulated IP, particularly if you've been around a while. I can speak from experience. So, but you want to sort of curate that in a way, sort of like the way maybe an art gallery curates the works of art in the gallery. You want to curate those things and maximize their effect. But really, if you think about again the nature of weeds, most of them, for most of the weeds, I mean, some of them are. Let me think. Some of them are annuals, so they don't stick around. They don't really put down very deep root systems. They're just there for 1 year, a part of a year, and then they're gone. But the perennials do take a great deal of care to produce root systems that stick around. We just talked earlier about the grass dying, but the weeds are still green. That's because they've produced deeper root systems. And so that's the seed of life power in the weed and in any plant, as you pointed out, trees as well. So, in business, I think it makes a lot of sense to have. I mean, I think that might be sort of a little bit of what a CFO might do for you, although it's beyond just finances, but they certainly do that on the financial part of the business. But just taking account of all of the assets that the entity has and curating them in such a way that you maximize their effect. So in podcasts, I guess, we certainly, one of those things is one big element of that would be brand equity. And again, I think we're just talking about spreading the brand and creating those unfair advantages that cause and collaborations that cause the brand of the podcast to spread. I think maybe one of the things that would make a lot of sense is, because this is the same thing with books. I think, if you're going to sell a book, you really want to tap into, or maybe even start a movement. That really is a powerful way to have a book move through the world. And, I'm going to hold this up real quickly. But this is another one of my books. You'll have to read backwards, but How to Get a Meeting with Anyone. But that book went out, and I think it did spark a bit of a movement. I mean, we've always been doing extraordinary things to get meetings with people, very clever things, but it sort of caused it to gel. And because of that, it actually was named one of the top 64 sales books of all time. And I think the reason for that was because, thank you, that's a big deal. It's a huge thing. But I think it's because, if you think about it, if we can't get meetings, you can't sell if you can't get meetings. You can't do anything, really, if you can't get meetings. In business, nothing happens. We need to connect with each other, or nothing happens in life. So having the ability to get a meeting with virtually anyone that's a superpower, let alone an unfair advantage.
But I'd love to follow up with that point you just made. What is, in a nutshell, the strategy? How do we get a meeting with just about anyone?
Well, I'm glad you asked that, because you know what? Being a podcaster, having a podcast, giving people the opportunity to spread their word or their story really is that's a great unfair advantage, first of all, of any podcaster. That's a great one.
Because you give them value to get the meeting. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, they want to talk about themselves. So that's and it's also a great contact device, because you just call up and reach out in some way to say, I'd like to interview you on my podcast. I think in 9 times out of 10, people are saying, sure, that'd be great. I'd love to do it. Thank you for the opportunity to share my story. So that's one. But I mentioned I've been on a lot of podcasts, and I've seen some podcasters do some really extraordinary things. Douglas Burdett, the marketing book podcast. I'm sure I got the name of it wrong now, but I think it is the marketing book podcast. But Douglas has this thank you kit that goes out after you've done the interview. And, I would imagine people do what I did. I'm saying, that's so cool. It had a little hand grenade. He has sort of a military theming to his marketing. So that the hand grenade was just a foam thing that you could squeeze, like a stress ball kind of thing. But there were all these things in his box that were there to say, hey, thank you so much for being on my show. And it creates a great deal of loyalty. Now, I think that's really important because, the experience of being asked on podcasts seems to be one of, a lot of times it's one of being a very transactional exchange. Like you sort of almost like being mugged. I want you on my podcast, but you have to agree. You're going to sign a contract, and you're going to agree to promote me everywhere to your audience. And I think what podcasters are kind of missing there is that if I go out, if I've been on 100, let's say 100 podcasts, we'll just to put a number on it. If I've been on 100 podcasts and I keep reaching out to my list to say, hey, I've been on another one, what kind of reaction or response do you suppose that's going to produce? I know that. I don't want to fatigue my list. And so I don't write to them every time I'm on a podcast. I might thank someone on LinkedIn for being on the podcast, or if they've posted about it, I'm definitely there supporting it. And that does bring in my followers. But to promote the podcast is just too transactional. Either I have content that you're interested in, or that your audience is interested in, or I don't. If I don't, then let's not do it.
So that point that you made about the thank you gift that the podcaster sent, I think, and the other point that you made about inviting people on your show to get a meeting with them, giving them value, I think both of those concepts fit within your root strategy, right? As you build relationships with people and as you give them value, I think that's building your roots and your foundations as a podcaster.
Yeah, I would say relationships have to be one of the biggest sources of value in your root strategy. Yeah, absolutely. But I would also say goodwill, because the more you do, you need to cultivate. I think podcasters perhaps need to do more to cultivate goodwill among their guests, even, because let them make them feel special, thank them, and foster a relationship instead of just sign this contract to promote me. I think the more you create goodwill with these guests, the more they're going to be saying, I just really want to do, what can I do to help you? I mean, I want to talk about you. This was great. So I think that would be another very, very helpful bit of advice for the podcasters.
Stu, thank you for sharing your time and your wisdom with us today. If our audience has enjoyed what you've shared and they want to learn more about your products and services, what are the best ways for them to do that?
I'd love to have you come to my author site. That's stuheinecke.com, StuHeinecke.com. And if you come there, I'd love to have you join my list. If you do, you'll get the first 2 chapters of How to Grow Your Business Like a Weed. And also connect with me on LinkedIn. Just mention that you saw me on Nathan's amazing event, and I'm happy to connect with you there as well.
And for those who are watching or listening to this interview, if you have not yet taken advantage of the Summit VIP upgrade, it is free. It doesn't cost you anything, and there's lots of cool bonuses that you can get. Just click on the button below and you can learn more about that. Thank you again, Stu, and thank you guys for listening and watching this episode. And we wish you success in growing your podcast like a weed. Here are my key takeaways from this episode. Number 1, weeds have a fierce mindset that powers relentless growth without getting hampered by emotions like depression or self-pity. Adopt this resilient attitude. Number 2, leverage unfair advantages like unique IP, trademarks, and authority status to dominate markets. Number 3, the Vine strategy means partnering with existing infrastructures, companies, and influencers to rapidly expand reach. Number 4, build deep roots by carefully managing assets and nurturing strong business relationships and goodwill. Number 5, having books and products out there establishes you as an expert, lending credibility. Number 6, collaboration allows you to tap into others' audiences and strengths, increasing scale. Number 7, use a podcast to give value and get meetings. People enjoy sharing their stories. And finally, number 8, stand out by developing niche, ultra-targeted listener communities, quality over quantity. If you want to simplify your podcasting adventure, I recommend you check out PodUp. It's an all-in-one podcasting platform with more than 35 integrated modules. You can get a free trial at podup.com. Thanks for joining us for this episode, and I wish you success as you start growing your podcast like a weed.